Oh, you bet.
Can you share your screen, I guess?
Yes, yes.
Okay, we're working then. Ms. Python.
Yes, sir.
Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay.
Everybody's ready? You letting everybody in?
I think everybody's already in.
Everybody's in?
Yeah, I think they come in with the webinar.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everybody. Glad you all were able to join us for our very first Ag Athletics Foundation Town Hall. Of course, our guest speaker for today, well, our speaker for this evening is our athletics director, Earl Hilton. He will discuss some updates that we have going on in athletics. His presentation will last approximately 25-30 minutes, and then we will open it up for questions in a question and answer session. So without further ado, Mr. Hilton.
Thank you, Ms. Python. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I do hope my presentation is not like 25 or 30 minutes. I hope it's closer to 15. And then we have some conversation, some opportunities for questions. This is something that I'm hoping that we'll be able to do 4 times a year. I was reminded again this summer that I'm not a great communicator, that I'm a good secret keeper. And so this is part of our effort to do better in that space. I'd like to do this on again, 4 times a year basis, probably in September, November, February, and April, likely around our Board of Trustees schedule. So look for the next one in February. The format, as Ms. Python suggested, will follow the same structure, I think, in most of these events. For the first 15 to 20 minutes, we'll talk about the hot topics in athletics, either at A&T or across the national landscape for athletics, what we see and what impacts that might have on A&T. And then we'll open up the balance of it, 25, 30, 40 minutes for questions. And Mr. Holloway and Ms. Python will help us field those questions and funnel them to me. And I'll try to be as transparent and as candid as I can in responses to those questions. The 2 topics that I want to discuss tonight, capital campaign status, since we've had several conversations about that. And I also want to visit the House settlement. I know we've had conversations about the House settlement. I want to talk about how it's developing and again, what implications that might have for us here at A&T. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about the elephant in the room right now. Football. I do know that no one's happy with where we are right now. I know the students aren't happy. Certainly the coaches aren't happy. You're not happy. I'm not happy with how we are performing in our football program right now. But I also want you to know that I am absolutely convinced that Coach Brown is the right person at the right time, in the right place to help us navigate through this and get to the place where we will be happy with our football program. He has my complete support. The more that I look at it and consider it and evaluate it, I am more and more persuaded that he is the guy that can lead us through this. So I want to put that out there before we start. That's where my thinking is right now in that space. Certainly you have questions about that. I will try to, again, be as candid and transparent as I can as you have questions about that or other topics. So with your permission, I'm going to see if I can go and talk about the capital campaign. As you recall, the last time we met, we talked about the feasibility study. We had to have a feasibility study to look at, was this the right time? Were these the right projects? Is this the right amount that we should talk about raising for a capital campaign? And so we completed that process early summer and received a report from the Paradigm Company, which is the company that we hired to conduct that feasibility status report for us. Their findings in their report is there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for A&T athletics. We knew that. Their support for student athletes and the leadership of the institution and the department. There's also, it's well recognized that we need resources for scholarships and for facilities. I mentioned earlier, I was reminded again that the communication from athletics from me has been inadequate and incomplete. And so this is one of the ways we're trying to address that. But that was one part of the feedback that we got from the feasibility study. The recommendation from Paradigm, I have it outlined there or underlined. They did not feel that based on their conversation with us, with our alumni and supporters, that we were ready for a $100 million campaign in athletics facilities right now. The recommendation is that we try to do smaller projects in the $20 million range. They also recommended that we work with the new institutional leadership to determine what the cadence or pace will be for Chancellor Martin and his strategic goals or initiatives with the institution, and whether there will be a capital campaign for A&T coming forward. If there is, will athletics be part of that campaign, or should we consider having a departmental specific campaign for athletics? And so their recommendation, again, is you go with some smaller projects quietly, and then we continue to work with the chancellor and his office to determine what the strategic direction of the institution might be, so that we coordinate any efforts that we might have toward a larger or more expansive facility campaign for athletics. So we're doing that right now. As you see there in the bottom, we're currently in the process of renovating the 2 racquetball courts in Corbett Gymnasium to turn them into a weight room for all the student athletes on this side of campus. We're constructing 2 new football practice fields that will be graded and irrigated and landscaped just like the game field, so that our student athletes will have acceptable practice surfaces to use, especially when the weather is bad. We're creating a women and men's basketball lounge also in Corbett. We are finally, I think, making progress on the sports performance center, the Dome, which has been a longstanding project for us. I believe we're in a place where we're going to be able to see actual progress there in that space. And then, of course, the track is a topic that we're preparing to replace the track again. It's over 5 years old, and we're looking to replace the track. And then certainly the Hall of Fame, and constructing an actual physical Hall of Fame for us and for our A&T alumni greats. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the next step will be to work with the chancellor, his team, and the institution to figure out if athletics should go ahead with an athletics capital campaign, or if we should be part of a broader institutional capital campaign. All right. This part will be reviewed for some of you. I know we've talked about this in a couple of meetings. We may have broadcast this, so I won't spend a lot of time on these slides. You've all heard of the House settlement. You know that it was a proposal put forward by the NCAA and the Power 5 conferences last year. As you recall, the NCAA and the P5, the Power 5 conferences, the SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, were all sued and are still being sued by a number of different plaintiffs groups. 3 of the most prominent ones have been grouped into a settlement called the House settlement. See, it was the House lawsuit, you had the Hubbard lawsuit, you had the Carter lawsuit. They've been grouped into a package, which is being called the House settlement proposal. That proposal was submitted to a judge during the summer. She initially had questions about some of the parameters of the proposed settlement. She pushed it back to the litigants to evaluate. They responded a couple of weeks ago. She gave her tentative approval of that proposed settlement. We're in the process now. No, we've already actually just completed the process last week of providing the NCAA a list of best known, last known addresses for all of the student athletes that participated in A&T between 2016 and 2024. Because each of these young people will have a chance to opt in or opt out of this proposed settlement. So the expectation is that over the next several months, they will all receive a letter from the NCAA advising them of the settlement and giving them the opportunity to decide to be part of the class or not part of the class. Assuming that a majority of the student athletes of the Division I student athletes across the landscape opt into the settlement, then we would expect that sometime late winter, early spring, in the April-May window, we would get a class certification, and then the settlement will be approved sometime in the May window, with payments potentially beginning toward the middle of 2025 to these student athletes who have opted into the settlement. And if you recall, prior to 2015, all that schools could provide to a student athlete was a scholarship, room, board, tuition fee, and books. In 2015, 2016, the Power Five said, we're also going to give our kids the cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is the difference between a full grant and aid and what the financial aid office actually suggested it costs to attend A&T. For our purposes, that's about a $4,000 difference. And so the Power Five schools said, if you're a member of our conference, you have to give that cost of attendance in addition to the scholarship. Anybody else, for us, it became permissive. We could if we wanted to, or if we could afford to. So that became the NCAA regulations in 2015, 2016, 2021. On June 21st, the Supreme Court handed down the Alston decision. Alston was a decision which indicated to the NCAA that it was a violation of antitrust legislation for the NCAA to prevent schools from providing additional money to support the academic pursuits of student athletes. That the number that they chose was $5,980, almost $6,000. So that became the law on June 21st of 2021. 9 days later, the NCAA gave us interim guidance on name, image, and likeness, NIL, and said that student athletes could begin to monetize their name, image, and likeness. So the House settlement is essentially looking at those three revenue streams and saying, I was a student in 2016, 2017, 2018. I didn't have access to cost of attendance or to Alston money or to NIL, and I should have. And because I didn't, you owe me money. The proposed settlement of that liability is about $2.8 billion that the NCAA is proposing we pay back to all of those student athletes over the course of the next 10 years, between 25 and 34. Now, these will be in annual increments, paid out again over a 10-year period. The NCAA, as well as all Division I institutions, hope to get some protection here for other litigation and to have some predictability in terms of how Division I athletics will operate, at least for the next decade. That's what the House settlement covers. Those three lawsuits, again, the Hubbard is Alston looking backward, House is NIL looking backward, and Carter is revenue sharing and pay for play looking forward. Now, the rub is the percentage of liability that's going to be borne by the various subsections of Division I. As you recall, I indicated that the lawsuit, the plaintiffs, no, the defendants in the lawsuit, the NCAA and the Power Five conferences. We were not named in the lawsuit. No FCS school was, no FCS conference was. It was those five conferences in the NCAA were the ones who were sued because the plaintiffs correctly understood that the majority of the revenue being generated and not shared with student athletes came out of those 64, 65 schools, 69 schools. The allocation of the $2.8 billion, again, the proposal suggests it will follow the following format. The NCAA will eat about 41% of it, $1.1 billion that they'll take out of their generated revenue or their savings or their other sources, resources, $114 million a year over the next 10 years to eat about 41% of that liability. The Autonomous Five, the Power Five, will take about 25% of that liability. The non-Power Five FBS schools or conferences, the App State, the ECUs, the Charlottes, will take about what they're saying here is 9%. The football championship subdivision, which is us, FCS, our conferences, will eat about 12%. And then the D1 non-football schools, again, so that is your UNCGs, your UNC Wilmingtons. Division I, but they don't have football. They will eat about 12% of it. Now, this is a proposal in the settlement. But when you back the numbers out and you look at what the revenue looks like, if you allocated liability based on revenue and how much money these schools make, then the distribution for the payments would be significantly different. Essentially, there's about $240 million that the Power 5 schools are not paying, that they are allocating to the non-Power 5 FBS, the FCS, and the non-football D1s. So these three categories here are overpaying by these amounts based on their percentage of expenditures as compared to what the FBS Power 5 schools are paying. And so that's been the frustration with the other 26 conferences, is that we weren't plaintiffs to the lawsuit. Our student athletes didn't generate this money, aren't going to get this money, and you're expecting us to pay so that you can settle the liabilities you have with your former student athletes. And that's been the pushback and the kickback from the other 26 Division I conferences, is that it doesn't seem fair. The Power 5 has, to this point, not been receptive to arguments about making it more proportional or allocating those obligations in a more rational way. Now, as I note here, A&T's annual liability for the next 10 years, if this settlement is approved, will be about $300K a year. So a little over $3 million that we'll pay in the next 10 years. This will not be money that we have to find and send to the NCAA. This will be money that the NCAA won't send to us. In a typical year, the NCAA sends us between $600,000 and $700,000 across 9 different buckets: for athletic support, for scholarship support, for academic enhancement. There's about 9 different buckets that they send money to schools, Division I schools, to help support their athletics programs. We get, again, between $500,000 and $700,000 a year. For the next 10 years, the NCAA will pull $300,000 of that, approximately. They'll claw it back, and they just won't send it to us. So it'll just be a hit to our budget that we will feel in the NCAA distributions that we will not receive moving forward. Now, it's been conservatively estimated that 90 to 95% of this payback will go to the athletes in 2 sports and at Power 5 schools. And again, these are estimates at this point. 90 to 95% of this $2.8 billion will go to football and men's basketball at the Power 5 conferences. Essentially, we're going to be sending our money to schools that are in the Power 5. So schools in the ACC or the SEC or the Pac-10, Big 10, Pac-12 will be receiving the $300,000 that we're sending and distributing it to their former student athletes. Again, the projection right now is that for the non-P5, non-FBS, the FCS student athlete, the likelihood is that their payout will be somewhere in the $50 range. Now, we will have student athletes who, if they opt into the settlement, will be able to command more money than that. Think of your Tariq Cohen's or your Matt McCain or your Brandon Parker. Those individuals will be able to argue, I think successfully, that they would have commanded a higher market value in the NIL space or in the video game space. And so those athletes from A&T will likely get more than the 50. But for the run-of-the-mill, the golfer, the tennis player, the bowler, the likelihood is that their settlement amount will be about $50 spread out over 10 years. So that's a $5 check. Yeah. The other piece, or the second piece about this settlement, is that they are eliminating scholarship limits and instituting roster limits. Now, you are all likely familiar with the fact that every sport has traditionally had a scholarship limit. And everybody that was in Division I was bound by that limit. Baseball, for instance, could spread 11.7 full rides over about 35 guys. Now, we got 11.7, UNCG got 11.7, Wake Forest got 11.7, Clemson got 11.7. Everybody got 11.7 scholarships to spread out over 35 guys, which means essentially no one in baseball ever got a full ride. The proposal is to eliminate scholarship limits, and you see what the limits are today as they exist by sport, and to instead, create roster limits, meaning everyone knows you need 35 or 40 guys to play baseball. So instead of having a scholarship limit of 11.7, let's say we're going to have a roster limit of 34, but everybody on that roster can receive a scholarship, can receive a full ride. Now, the only group that does not change is women's basketball. They have been at 15 for decades. Men have been at 13. Women have been at 15. And this proposal, they'll stay at 15. Men could go up. You see, bowling goes from 5 to 11, cross country. You can read through here and see. We'll have to decide as an institution and as a conference how much we step into this space. Football, for instance, they're talking about a roster limit of 105. Now, our roster has had as many as 125, 128 on it. The average FBS roster is between 120 and 130 student athletes. If this settlement is approved and these roster limits hold, then there will be a whole bunch of young men who have been player number 106 through 125 who will no longer be able to be on the roster at these schools. We will have to cut our roster as well. My dog, she's hungry. Sorry. So we'll have to manage our rosters down to these roster limits, assuming this comes into play. We'll also have to decide, can we scholarship up to this amount? Right now we're limited to 5 scholarships in bowling. We have 5 scholarships. We have 7 or 8 on the team. This will allow us to go to 11, which, an additional 6 scholarships. Can we afford that? Do we want to afford that? The answer to both those questions is yes, we want to. We have a nationally ranked bowling team, and I want to give Coach Kearney every opportunity to be competitive in this space. And so I want to go to 11 scholarships. We're going to have to find the resources to do that. We'll have to make similar decisions across all of our sports and figure out where we want to be in this space and where we can be competitive. Finally, NIL, the last provision of this House settlement is that schools will be able to make direct payments to student athletes for their name, image, and likeness. When NIL was created back in 2021, when the NCAA gave us interim guidance, they were very clear and explicit that schools and school administrators, school personnel could not be engaged in the conversation, the development of contracts, the evaluation of deals. We could not have any engagement with the student athletes or the potential donor or business that wanted to buy the rights to the name, image, and likeness of a particular student athlete. We were not able to be involved in that conversation. The NCAA learned in the ensuing years that led to a lot of unfair contracts and exploitation of student athletes. And so they eased those restrictions in January of this year. And with this House settlement, they will liberalize it even further to the extent that, to the best of our ability, we will be able to directly compensate our student athletes for their name, image, and likeness. Now, the logistics of that are still being worked out. Will we do it directly? Will we still go through a collective? We have the Pride of A&T collective. Will we still go through them to make that work? I think that's the route we're going to go. I think it's safer for us to go that route. But those logistics are still being developed and worked out. But we will be able to pay institutionally directly to those student athletes. That will create a benefit for our donors because they'll be able to give money to A&T through a 501c3 and enjoy the tax benefit of giving to a 501c3, which you can't do when you give to a collective. And we'll be able to direct that money either institutionally or through our collective to the teams and student athletes that our coaches desire. That will allow us to also be more gender equitable in this space, which is something that I think all of us are concerned about and want to be aware of. Those are the big pieces. Again, the House settlement has come out of the judge's chamber. She's given tentative approval. We're now in the process of notifying all potential plaintiffs to see who wants to opt in and opt out. Assuming that it gets to the finish line as it's currently drafted, we'll have the liability for 10 years we'll have to pay back. We'll have the roster limits instead of scholarship limits, and we'll have the ability to pay directly to our student athletes for name, image, and likeness, or Alston benefits moving forward. And I believe this is the last slide. This is just my question. These are the buckets we talked about at the very beginning. The collective capital campaign, what it will look like. How are we going to generate the dollars that will be necessary for us to compete in this space? And here are ideas that some schools are using right now. We will again have to make a decision institutionally about where we want to be nationally competitive, where we want to be regionally competitive, where we want to get competitive just in our conference, and then operate in a way that's consistent with those priorities. The speculation right now, if you were going to ask me how much money do I think we need institutionally to compete in this space, I would say between $400,000 and $500,000 a year would allow us to take care of the needs that we have in football, men's basketball, women's basketball, track and field, bowling, and then spots across all the other teams that will allow us to recruit and retain the student athletes that we will need to be competitive across those spaces. Let's see, how did I do on the time? Oh, it did take 25 minutes. Sorry. I did talk longer than I expected. That's my presentation. Those are the hot topics right now. The House settlement is the biggest driver in Division I sports right now, and how we get to the place of some predictability and certainty in Division I athletics, hopefully over the next 12 to 18 months, is critically important to all of us. Okay, so B. Holloway and Ms. Pyfrom, are there any questions that I can answer?
First, I want to thank Mr. Hilton for his presentation, and I want to thank you for all of your questions. We do have some questions in the queue, and we'll start with Bill Hubbard. He just wants you to elaborate on your support for North Carolina A&T head football coach Vincent Brown.
Great question, and I expected that to be the first one. And I can't say much more than I've said right now because it's a personnel matter. I would love for Mr. Hubbard to come to my office when we could speak directly and candidly. This is not the forum to talk specifically about personnel matters. And that's a frustrating answer to give. But I would love to visit with any of you in a different forum or setting to talk about why, high level nutshell, Coach Brown did not create the circumstances that we're in right now, and is doing his very best, and I think doing a pretty good job working through the situation we find ourselves in as a football program right now. And I believe that he is well positioned to lead us through this. But again, Mr. Hubbard, I'd love to visit with you offline if you'd like to try to give you more detail or background, as to my thinking at least.
Thank you, Mr. Hilton. We have another one from Brandon Cyrus. He has a question about media rights deals. How much do we receive from those, and how does that compare with other FCS schools and or conferences?
Another great question. I may lean on Shamika at that point as we get into corporate sponsorships generally, but media rights specifically. When we were in the MEAC and the Big South, we were ESPN as a conference. And so we received between $25,000 and $30,000 a year for our media rights, and ESPN owned them all. The CAA is with Flow Sports. The annual media rights fee that we receive from Flow Sports every year is about $130,000 for A&T's media rights for the streaming broadcast that we put out. They also allow us to monetize our broadcast, our streaming broadcast, on local linear networks. You may have noticed that we broadcast our home football games this year on ABC 45, CW 48?
My 48.
My 48. So local linear broadcast here in the Triad region. We will expect to do the same thing with basketball. We won't do all home games, but we're looking at a package right now of 5 men's and 5 women's games that will be carried on our local ABC station for our fans within 150 miles of A&T. That is an option or an opportunity that ESPN does not ever give. Additionally, we have a chance, I think 3 times this year, we'll be playing on CBS, on the national CBS channel. 3 of our basketball games will be broadcast on CBS, again, their national channel, which is another opportunity that we did not have with previous media partners. So the 25 to 28 to 30,000 with ESPN versus 130 with the Flow Sports, plus the local linear broadcast, plus the CBS broadcast. I hope that was responsive.
Thank you so much. We have another one from AJ Niles. Just wants you to maybe clarify on the football roster limits. Will the number of football players on the team, will that go down based on your presentation?
Great question, Mr. Niles. The way I understand it today, what they're saying today is yes. Yes, we will have to cap our roster at 105. And so will Chapel Hill, and so will Wake Forest. And so how that plays out, where those other student athletes go, is an open question right now. I think that could work for us in some ways. I also worry about, is 105 enough? If you start the season with 105, is that enough to get through a full football season? But yes, that's my understanding. The 105 is a hard roster limit, independent of how many use scholarship. Once you get to 105, you got to cap your roster. So yes, it will mean we'll have to reduce our numbers.
Thank you for your question, AJ. We'll move on now to Robert Davis. He has some facility questions for you, and I get this one a lot. Will there be, is there a plan to replace the chain link fence around Truist Stadium? That's one. Is there plans for an additional practice field on turf? Individual bucket seats for the reserve section, and are there plans for a new scoreboard? Let me know if you need me to repeat those 4
All right,
items.
so it's yes, no, and maybe. So the chain link fence is an eyesore. When I started talking about this capital campaign 3 or 4 years ago, the one thing my wife told me, says, you must replace the chain link fence around Truist Stadium. That has to be. So yes, that is part of our master plan, to turn that into a brick and wrought iron kind of really classy, sharp looking entrance into that facility. It looks less institutional, and just really invites people into that space. AstroTurf practice field, yes, there is a conversation about that. We looked at putting an AstroTurf game field in. Every time I bring that up, I'm reminded by my staff that I work at A&T, and A stands for agriculture, and we grow grass, and so we don't want a turf game field. Speaking to our coach, he agrees he does not want a turf game field. I think we're the only school in the CAA that has a grass field, and I believe it provides a competitive advantage for us. So we're going to try to keep the game field as grass. And that also allows us to do some different things with track and javelin inside the stadium that you couldn't do if we had a turf field. But there is a recognition and a desire that we do need to have an all-surface field somewhere in athletics, not just for athletics, but for the band and for other student groups who need access to those kinds of facilities, regardless of the weather. So after we get these 2 practice fields built, there is a plan for us to put a turf field. And we're still going back and forth on the location, but in that same complex, in the stadium complex, that would allow us to add soccer to our portfolio and provide an all-weather surface for not only football but any other outdoor sport, including the band for their practices. Bucket seats for fans, that has not been a conversation yet. It's not a bad one. It just has not come up as a conversation for us. So we can certainly entertain that and talk about what that might look like or cost. And then replacing the scoreboard has to be, it's got to be, and I don't want to misquote the age, but it's decades old at this point. I know we just replaced the display portion of it. Oh, Shamika, how many years ago? It's been a minute. We just replaced the big screen, but we have not done anything recently to the rest of the scoreboard, and so that does need to be on our radar as a
I want
project.
to say 7 years,
Those
7, 8 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, 7 or 8 years ago. Okay, yeah, man, time flies. Okay, great question.
Okay, I got one from an anonymous viewer here, and I'm thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, but he wants to know if walk-on players that have heavily contributed over the course of multiple seasons, are they given scholarships? But I'm guessing that's up to the discretion of the coach, correct?
Yeah, that's a coach's question. I would say that our history across most of our teams is yes. That has been the posture that most of our coaches have taken. If we have walk-on players that have contributed and been solid citizens, I think across most of our programs, they have been rewarded with a scholarship at some point in their upper class years.
Thank you. Got one from Billy Mims.
Well, Dr. Mims.
Are there plans for Board of Trustees and the administration to adequately fund our football program in such a way that would allow our program opportunity to compete at a championship level? I don't want to put words in Mr. Mims' mouth, but I'm thinking that's national championship type deal.
I love the way Dr. Mims is thinking. And every indication that I get, Dr. Mims, is yes. The Board of Trustees is completely behind athletics. The new chancellor is completely behind and support of athletics, anxious for us to be the very best that we can be, to compete in all the right spaces, and to provide the support that we need, not just in scholarships and NIL money, but with facilities and coaches and support staff. I mean, it's one thing for us to say to our student athletes, we're going to have to go and compete in a tougher space, but we need to make sure that we have the academic support to compete in a tougher space, and the trainers and the compliance and the marketing and the corporate sponsorships. All of those need to receive additional support so that we can all, as a department, compete more effectively at this higher space. And every indication that I have received from the Board of Trustees and from Chancellor Martin is that they're all in with athletics competing at the very, I can't say the highest levels, but in the highest spaces, competing to the best of our ability in those spaces.
update on War Memorial Stadium renovations?
Yeah, that's, I got an email today. Part of the plans are with in-state construction. The delay with War Memorial has nothing to do with A&T. Because this is a state project, everything has to be blessed and re-blessed by state construction. And because we're trying to renovate a historical site and we're building in a floodplain, because that's where the stadium was built, in a floodplain, on top of, I can't say a landfill, but no one knows what's below the stadium. There are a lot of hoops to be jumped through. So the next step is to begin knocking down the bleachers on the left field line, to begin abating that concrete, knocking it down so we can clear that out for construction. The email that I got today was it's still in state construction. There's a delay with the review. I did not hear back whether we're talking about weeks or months on that delay. But the War Memorial Stadium is a project that continues to require a lot of attention to try to move forward and to get right. Great question. Don't lose the question. Please keep asking the question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a question about, and I think this is kind of a twofold question because we have a CAA football conference and then a CAA conference, but where, in terms of, where do we compare in terms of spending with the other schools in our conference, understanding that the Villanovas and some of those guys are not a part of the, or just a part of the football conference, but question about spending.
Great question. The difficulty is pulling out scholarships. So I don't want to give bad information. Let me give big picture stuff. And then maybe Brian, I can bring that back in our report in February about where we are across recruiting or across equipment or across some specific categories. The average budget in the CAA is about $26 million. Our budget's about $18 million. We're certainly on the low end of that. But again, in that number is their scholarship dollars. And so Hofstra, a full ride at Hofstra is 80 grand. A full ride at A&T for an out-of-state student is 31 or 32. For an in-state student, about 17. And so I can give you the budget numbers, but I would like to go back and cut it up so that we can talk apples to apples and say, this is what they're spending on recruiting. This is what they're spending on equipment. This is what they're spending on medical staff. This is how many bodies they have. So it's a good question. I just gave you the big picture of what the total budgets are, but it's a little bit confusing or a little bit inaccurate because I can't pull scholarships out of that off the top of my head.
Excellent. Excellent. Question about classroom time. With the move to the CAA, are our student athletes getting adequate classroom time, or has that classroom time decreased?
Another very good question. We have a class attendance policy that is monitored by our Chancellor's Council on Intercollegiate Athletics. There's a group on campus that provides oversight of athletics that reports directly to the Chancellor. It's chaired by faculty, and each of the subcommittees is chaired by faculty, so that the institution does its very best to make sure that athletics operates as part of the institution and not as an independent island. So that subcommittee evaluates our missed class time every year against our missed class policy. And while I cannot give actual numbers off my head right now, I can say that our compliance with that missed class policy has improved over the last 2 years as compared to what it was in previous years. We are missing less class, or we're more in compliance with that policy. I don't want to overstate. We have fewer student athletes who are in violation of the missed class policy today than we did in the past.
Excellent. Excellent. I think it's something we should address. I think we've addressed it as a athletics department in terms of fallen athletes. How do we honor those who have passed away while playing their sport? And I think also we can maybe dive into retirement and honoring of jerseys and some of our greats. And where do we stand on that?
Great question. The simple answer, the quick answer is we don't have a policy on how we treat student athletes who passed away while they're competing or while they're active student athletes. We have had a number, three that I'm aware of in my time at A&T, of student athletes who died while they were in competition or practicing for a team. And we don't have a policy about how those young people are memorialized or celebrated. And Mr. Means brought that up to me earlier this year. I've discussed it with the AAF board at least on one occasion. We need to develop that. There needs to be a way that appropriately memorializes and remembers, but it needs to be replicable. We have to be able to do it every time. And again, we don't have a standardized policy in athletics. And it gets messy pretty quick. I mean, if you died while you're playing sport, that's pretty easy. Well, what if you're a student athlete and you die in a car crash? You're a current student athlete and you die in an accident, or we had a student athlete several years ago who was shot. How do we effectively or appropriately memorialize or remember those student athletes? So it needs to be done. I don't have a quick answer. I would love input and feedback into how we can do this, because we need to have a policy that works and that everyone recognizes is what we're doing. But that question hasn't been answered. Now, Brian, you bring up another question about our commemoration process for student athletes who have excelled across their sports. And we have not had a standard process for when a jersey is honored, when a jersey is recognized, when a jersey is retired. We have, to my knowledge, only 2 jerseys that are officially retired by the institution at this point.
3.
Now, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. We've got
It's 3.
3.
Oh,
Okay, so Bethea, Adels,
And Holland, baseball.
baseball. That's right. Thank you. There are 3 that have been officially recognized, canonized, celebrated, retired jerseys from the institution. But we ought to have different standards of how we celebrate. We can have recognized jerseys that we hang in the rafters or put on the bleachers or put off the press box or on the outfield wall. Jerseys that are celebrated and recognized and honored, but not the numbers aren't retired. The numbers are still in circulation. And so there's a draft document that we created to try to define what the criteria would be and how we would appropriately recognize all of our greats from past years. We have stepped into this space a little bit with Mr. Bethea, with Mr. Holland, with Mr. Adels. We need to continue to push forward into that space so that, again, we appropriately recognize our fantastic student athletes.
This comes from Michael Suggs, and I think it's important to expand this over all of our sports. But what is our assessment what is our assessment of our athletics department, I guess, from a competitive standpoint, since joining the CAA?
Yeah, great question. Initial response is everything is, with the exception of the sport we mentioned earlier at the beginning, the call, everything else is trending in the right direction. I mean, we hosted 3 NIT games last year at Corbett. We're ranked 17th in the country in women's basketball right now. Our women's volleyball program is in 2nd place right now in the CAA. They're 1 game away from being tied for first. There are 4 teams at 9-3. We're at 8-4. We have never been in this space with volleyball. And I'm very happy with that. Obviously, bowling is independent of the CAA, but they continue to be nationally ranked and will win a national championship. Golf men's and women's golf trending in the right direction with the terms of the athletes we're able to recruit to compete for us. Tennis, more competitive in the last couple of years, especially on our men's team, than we have been in a very long time. So I think from a competitive standpoint across the department generally, very happy with the types of athletes we're able to recruit and the way our coaches are developing and recruiting them. But a good question.
Thank you. Support for non-revenue sports, as you discussed the settlement, how much will our non-revenue sports be hurt by that? Will that be to the point of eliminating some sports?
Whoever asked that question is very perceptive. It is not our intention at A&T to eliminate any sports. I want to add sports, but there are already articles being written. You can search them and find them. The P5 schools are already talking about the sports they're going to either eliminate or de-scholarship, meaning you may still have men's gymnastics, but there'll be no scholarships for it. The sports that are most at risk are your male Olympic sports. Those are the ones who are most at risk of being cut. Because from a Title IX perspective, they're the easiest to chop. So yes, that is going to happen. There will be, and this is just my thinking, but over the next decade, there will be hundreds, there will be thousands of Division I sport opportunities that exist today that will not exist in 10 years. They will disappear. They will be eliminated because schools will make decisions about where to put their resources to support a couple of 3 big sports, and that will involve eliminating Olympic sports. That's just my perspective, but I think we're going to lose thousands of spaces, of spots on teams that exist today in wrestling, in gymnastics, in volleyball, in golf, in tennis, in track and field, where you have young men running and participating and competing in those sports today across Division I that will not exist in 10 years. Those positions, those spots won't be there. Just my thought.
Wow. Interesting there. Interesting answer there. So many questions, so many great questions, but we are running short on time here. We'll get one more to the AD, one more to Ms. Pyfrom of the AAF, and then we will close out. And really, really appreciate everyone who logged on here. Great participation, great interest in A&T athletics as always. And so we give you a big, big thank you.
Thank you
for that.
Yes.
One more for Coach Hilton, Earl Hilton. What can you kind of explain the NIL collective? What does all of that mean? What does all of that mean? And is it just for football and basketball, or can others participate in the NIL collective?
Great question. Short answer is anybody can participate, and you can direct the money as specifically as you want it to go. So Ms. Pyfrom has $100, and she favors lawn darts at A&T, and she wants to support women's lawn darts. And so she doesn't go to the AAF because she knows we can't give the money directly to Billy Joe, who's playing lawn darts for us. So she goes to the Pride of A&T Collective and says, I've got $100 that I want to go to Billy Joe on the lawn dart team. And that collective can take the money, and they're going to take 15% of it. And the $85 will go to Billy Joe on our lawn dart team. The collective will figure out what activity of value, what ROI, what activity he'll be engaged in or she'll be engaged in to quote unquote earn that $85. Maybe he'll make a couple of tweets or a couple of posts on Instagram about Ms. Shamika's business, or he'll tweet out about A&T athletics, or he'll talk about he'll receive some assignment as part of his contract. He'll fulfill that contract. The collective will pay him the $85. Now that is as it sits up, as it exists today, as we sit here tonight. The way that I hope to have it set up by next fall is because we'll be able to pay directly to student athletes, because we'll be able to directly support their NIL activities through A&T. Shamika could take that $100 and she could give it to the AAF, and she would get her tax deduction for that charitable contribution. And she would say, I want it to go to Billy Joe on the lawn dart team. That would come from the AAF to me. I would then send that $100 to the same collective. But this collective, we're paying a monthly rate to manage our NIL activity. We're paying them X number of dollars a month to handle our NIL activity. So I send them $100 and I say, I want this to go to Billy Joe on the lawn dart team. They send that $100. They create the contract for Billy Joe to post the 3 articles or tweets about Ms. Pyfram's business. And then they send Billy Joe that check for $100. Now, the reason that I am suggesting, I think, today that I want to go through the collective still is because I don't want the check to come directly from A&T Athletics. Because any check that comes from A&T Athletics is going to be signed by the chancellor and the CFO, by Robert. Now, my check and Brian's check and Shamika's check are signed by the chancellor and Robert. We're employees. And I don't ever want to be in a position where a student athlete is receiving a check for NIL that looks like employment. The dog is going crazy. That looks like employment. And so we would use the collective. We would pay them, again, a flat fee so that your $100, Shamika's $100 would go all the way to the student athlete. We would pay them the flat fee. They'll negotiate and handle the contract and all the payment and paperwork, and it'll go directly to that student athlete. That's my thinking today. But anybody can do the collective right now. There will be a 15% off the top for expenses, and it can go to a team, to a sport, to a particular student athlete. You can make it as specific as you want to make it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Hilton, for your presentation this evening. I would like to thank everybody on the call for joining us this evening. We have run out of time. As Mr. Hilton stated, our next town hall will be in February prior to our Board of Trustees meeting, so be on the lookout for that notification. We tried to answer all the questions, but we had lots and lots of questions, just not enough time to get to all of them. And so
Hey, I'm gonna keep this real short and sweet, guys, because I gotta do some parenting. Let me say this: I absolutely love Earl Hilton, whatever his name. Hey, that white man is legit. Shout out to A&T. They have a damn good AD. Listen, there's not too many ADs in HBCU football. Let's just call it a spade a spade. Let me turn this. It's just a little too bright for me, right? Let's just call it a spade a spade. There's not too many ADs in HBCU sports that would be that open, that transparent, and not defensive. Okay, let me just say that. Not defensive when answering questions on, the situation in sports, or, what's going on with this, what's going on with that, what's going on with this. Gotta love how open and transparent Earl is when it comes to A&T athletics. Listen, I don't care. I was texting BJ, and I told BJ, I said, listen, I don't care how many hires he gets wrong. You don't let somebody who does good business like that walk out the door, right? It's no different than trying to find a head coach that wins 8 to 9 games, right? But he can't get you to the championship. When you find an AD like that, who does good business, has great customer service, understands that he's in a position that the school is a public entity. He's treating the information like a public entity. It is not hoard. Oh, you don't need to know that. Oh, he's not dismissive or anything. He's super open, super transparent. He literally gave you the numbers that ESPN was paying the MEAC in their time. I did the math. If you had UMES, Coppin, if you put FAMU, Bethune, everybody back into the MEAC who was there, they were literally making $330,000 a year. That's what they were making. For them to get paid $30,000 with 11 schools, that means ESPN was paying them at the time that everybody was there. They were getting paid, or the distribution was, they were getting paid total of $330,000 a year, and the distribution was $30,000. So that's the numbers for you. You can do the math. I'm not a math whiz, but I just did the math. And now he's getting paid $130,000 with Flow Sports at CAA. So listen, at the end of the day, A&T can be ass in football, and they are ass in football. And Earl is standing by his guy. Congratulations, Earl. Stand by your guy, okay? He gonna get fired, okay? He's ass. You're gonna have to fire him sooner or later. He's ass, right? But this is like the one situation where I would not blame the AD, and I'm like, hey, AD, try it again. Listen, because I'm sorry. We just need more. Okay. I won't even do race, because then y'all be like, Scotty, the white man's ISIS coder. I won't even do race. Can we just get more grown adults who understand professionalism in the position of being an athletic director? Can I say that? That ain't got no color to do with nothing. All I'm asking is that you hire more capable people of being professional, because I can keep it a buck with you. Roman Banks is not professional. Travion Scott, not professional. Who else? I don't even know who the UAPB AD is. Like, some of this stuff is like you don't even know these people, let alone are they going to be super open. The commissioner's not even that open. The commissioner for the MEAC nor the SWAC, who are both public entities, are not that transparent. They are not. Right? Of the business of athletics. He literally broke down the settlement, how it affected the institution, gave you the numbers behind it, gave you everything you. And the funny thing is that if you're an HBCU alum at another institution, the information he just gave you could go back to your institution. So he literally taught everybody a class in the settlement, not just A&T athletics, not just A&T alums. He literally taught the whole HBCU space how the house settlement will affect you as an FCS program. So, I mean, if you want to ask me, like, y'all can say whatever you want about Earl. White, black, polka dot, stripe, purple, I don't give a damn. If you ask me to give a vote for who should be a commissioner of something, I don't give a damn. He could be the commissioner of the MEAC tomorrow. He could be the commissioner of the SWAC tonight at midnight. He could be my commissioner. That's the kind of people you're asking for. That's the kind of people you want. Good with numbers, good with people, understanding the position that he's in, and has great customer service, man. You can't ask for nothing better than that. Shout out to Aggie Land. Man, listen, I know we make fun of y'all in football, but y'all winning in the AD department. All right, I got to get up out of here. But, man, y'all be easy. Listen, until next time, you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to holla. God bless.